Hello, welcome to my bookshelf, and today I want to talk about the 10 most disappointing books that I read in 2017. I should probably just say off the bat that I don't necessarily hate all of these books, just that they're disappointing overall for probably a myriad of reasons, all of which I will explain to you as I discuss why they're on this list in the first place. And I think it goes without saying that, like, this is just my opinion, and if you like these books, I'm sorry that it's on this list. I feel bad, but it just didn't work for me for whatever reason. But what I love about reading is that there's just so many different books, and there's so many books that I will love that you won't, and vice versa, and that's okay. Let's just jump on into my list. So the first of which is a book I really just didn't like straight up, and that was Stories from a Moron by Ed Broth. This is a weird book to talk about. It's, I guess, nonfiction. The premise behind this is that Ed is a writer, and he has sent in these, they're more or less short stories to be published by magazines. So he has sent them into the magazine in the hopes of being published by them. And the basic premise that he keeps on doing over and over again is that, first off, he's sending short stories to magazines that don't publish short stories. So this book is supposed to be humorous, like it's supposed to be ironic, and there's a lot of irony just all up in here. To me, irony isn't very funny. I felt a lot for the publishers that he's sending this to repeatedly. I get it's a joke. I just think it gets to the point of where it would be annoying because he keeps sending it in over and over and over again. You know, if it's just once, it's fairly harmless, but he just kept putting it in for more dramatic, I guess, comedic effect, but it just didn't work for me. I mean, it kind of worked maybe the first time, but the problem with this book is that it's literally the same gag over and over and over again. There really is no originality past that. All the publishers are saying, like, first off, we don't publish short stories. And second of all, this is not even related to the subject of the magazine. Like, let's say it's Golfers Weekly. There's nothing about golf even in the short story to even try to make a connection. So then he resends it back, the same exact short story, except now there's just like random inserts of like golf facts in it. When they don't like that one, he writes a different short story with like the same golf facts in it. And then the publisher is kind of at a loss for words. He's like, you know, they try to be very polite as much as they can. You can kind of just feel the frustration from their point of view, and I really did feel it. I felt so bad for the publisher. So it was just a really repetitive gag, and to me it was like chuckle worthy at first, and then it just got annoying as I continued reading it. So I honestly skimmed the rest to see if anything changed, and nothing changed. So I DNF'd it, and I don't care that I did that. I honestly didn't see the merit of repeating the same gag over and over and over again. It just isn't funny. So I really didn't like that book. That was probably my least favorite book out of this entire list. Moving right along, another book that I just didn't know what to think. That was A Cure for Suicide by Jessie Ball. The first half of the book is great. I think it's really interesting, it's engaging, but then it seems to lose all subtlety, and like it is a pretty standard narrative at first, and then we're jumped out of the narrative and we're kind of given this exposition dump and just blocks of text. And we get a lot of explanation about like what is actually going on here in this world, and a lot of like random political things almost that like led up to this, because the story is more or less a dystopian. It is a really interesting concept. You have a great story and you have a great start to it even, but you just throw that all away to give us this random exposition dump that isn't necessary, and I think took me out of the book. And it was a very long one. Like, this isn't even a couple pages. This is like maybe a third of the book. Like, this is a long random dump of lots of information, and it's just so different from the rest of the book, because even the regular narrative isn't even a traditional narrative per se. It's mainly dialogue. It's a very quick read as far as that goes, and then like most of the reading of the book is this exposition dump, and it just feels very disjointed to me, and it just wasn't enjoyable. I didn't understand that choice. And then after that, like, the book isn't over. We kind of jump back to a narrative, but with different characters. So we kind of just say goodbye to the original person that you were following. We get some interesting insight, and I'm like, okay, this is maybe getting back to something I enjoy. And then we jump, I think one of the characters mentions like a play, and then we jump to like the screenplay of the play, and I was like, why? And it's a very bizarre play. It doesn't necessarily have anything, as far as I can tell, to do with the story. And then we jump back to the characters that we were just following, talking about the play, and then it ends on a cliffhanger. I won't say exactly what, but you're left on a cliffhanger. And that's the end of the story. And so it was just so disappointing on many different levels. I can't honestly recommend it to anyone. It's just bizarre, and like I said, not in a good way. So it's on this list. So, I mean, I guess this is one of those books that maybe this just isn't for me, but it's for other people. I wouldn't say most other people, but I'm sure that there's someone out there that enjoys it and maybe gets it, and I just don't get it on that level. But, you know, overall, I think that he's a good writer. I just didn't understand his choices. So I wouldn't completely dump him as far as an author, but I would be a little bit nervous jumping into another book of his. But I think he has great ideas, at least. I just hope he makes better decisions in other books. Moving right along, the next book that I did not enjoy that much was Before I Fall by Lauren Oliver. I pretty much hated every single character in here, and this is really the book that like solidified for me the idea that I love characters, and they don't have to be perfect characters. They can be flawed, and sometimes that makes it better, but I have to enjoy reading about these characters. They can't just be complete assholes, I guess. They had no redeeming qualities. They were very flat. They weren't fleshed out. I just had a lot of problems with the characters. I also didn't relate to them really at any level. They were the obnoxious, like, mean girls that I obviously was not a part of. And so I didn't relate to it really on any level. Our main character is only somewhat enjoyable as a character about like 3/4 of the way through the book, and I do get that all this stuff is kind of done on purpose, like that's part of the story, and I do get that, but I just didn't enjoy the story because she did that almost too well. I just hated them too much, and it was just a little over the top for me, I guess. And because I didn't relate to them, and this is probably another one of those places where I think it matters who the reader is. This just isn't a book for me. Again, it's a really interesting concept, but I just thought the execution wasn't done very well, and I just thought that she missed an opportunity to address this issue in a better way. Those are my thoughts on that. The next book I really didn't like. It's actually a 2-for-1 deal. It was both Insurgent and Allegiant. I'm grouping them together. Divergent was okay. It was definitely better than these two. Sometimes authors have trouble really following that up in a way that's really exciting for the reader, and for me personally it just did not work. And I've heard other people don't like Allegiant. I haven't really heard many people talk about Insurgent, so I'm not really sure how people feel about that. I didn't like Insurgent. I thought Allegiant was worse though, so I kind of agree with people there. I just felt like this was not a strong series. Though admittedly, I will say again that this just might be a case where I'm just not the target audience, I guess. I'm not the person that would enjoy this the most, but not to say that no one would. I think the main thread of this series is something different from what I expected, so there's a little bit of that, but overall I don't think that would have been a big deal. It's trying to go, I guess, on this bigger political level, and I personally can't stand politics in the real world, nonetheless fake worlds, so I just am not the person to enjoy those kinds of story plot lines. Not that it's like super political, but I guess it kind of goes the most in that realm, and I don't know how else to describe it, to be honest. But it just isn't the kind of story that I personally care that much about, and I felt like everything else in the story was very paint by numbers, and it just wasn't that original or exciting, and I just didn't really care about the characters. They made a lot of really dumb decisions. I understand that they're like high schoolers, more or less, but it's just, but anyway, so clearly, not the series for me. Divergent was okay, but I didn't like the follow-ups to it, so. Moving right along, the rest of the books on my list are not books that I absolutely hated as much as the ones I've just talked about, so those are probably the worst of my roasting of the books, if you will. Most of the other ones are just kind of disappointing for different reasons, which I will get into. So the first of which is The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie by Alan Bradley. This one had, again, it had a lot of potential, and I appreciated that, you know, while this was a murder mystery, it tried to do something different. And so obviously our main character is a middle schooler, but she's different from other middle schoolers. She's very smart, more or less a scientist, if you will, of her own right. And so there were things I really did enjoy about this book, but the storyline itself kind of fell flat for me. I don't really know exactly what it was, specifically about the storyline. I just wasn't that engaged. But there were parts that interested me, but nothing really blew me out of the water. Something that put it over the edge as far as I didn't like this book was there's a random part like in the middle of the book where the dad he was part of this like magic show. He's putting on this like horribly exaggerated, to me, offensive accent of this, I'm assuming it's supposed to be a Chinese person, and it was just so over the top and extreme, and I'm not one of those people that really gets offended by things, and obviously I'm not Asian, but to me it was like, I don't feel comfortable with this. This just does not seem kosher, if you know what I mean. It really left a really bad taste in my mouth, and so I think that probably colored the ending of the book. But even the beginning, like, I was intrigued, but nothing really grabbed me, and I wasn't super invested, and that really just knocked me down a lot of pegs as far as enjoying this book. So I don't think it's a horrible book overall, but it had weird parts to it. The next book on my list is I Love You, Ronnie. This is nonfiction, and it's more or less the letters of Ronald Reagan to his wife Nancy while he was away, and they more or less say the same thing, you know, like, oh, I really miss you, and I can't wait to get back to you, I love you so much. Obviously written better than that, but yeah, that's the gist. And they're all pretty much like that. There's other, you know, he kind of says, you know, a little bit like where he's at and what he's doing. It was just weird to me reading the letters because they really would only have merit to Nancy. It's just not something that really adds anything to someone who isn't Nancy to read, to be honest. So I stopped reading his letters. I was probably halfway through. It's a pretty short book. So about halfway through, I stopped actually reading the letter part, and I just read the parts where Nancy kind of fills in some of the blanks and kind of tries to give you context about like where they were in their life when he sent this and things like that. It's kind of like a mini history lesson. But at the same time, you can tell that she's writing it to people that, for the most part, know about their lives. And I don't. So this book really wasn't for me on a couple different levels. And so it really does make me want to read more about the Reagans. So I would be very curious to read more about their lives. But this book was disappointing because it wasn't that. Those letters are really cute, by the way. Like, more people need to write letters to their loved ones. It's so cute. The next book on my list is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. Did not enjoy this book, and I was kind of disappointed by that just because I had read it in middle school and I did really enjoy it then. But as an adult, I mean, again, this is my opinion, but I just don't think it's well written. Again, there's this great idea underneath all of this, but I just felt like the execution just wasn't there, and I think it really did ruin the story for me. There's a lot of characters, there's 10 different people invited to this island, and they start slowly dying off one by one, and that's the premise of the story. But all the characters are very flat, they're not fleshed out, they were kind of difficult to tell apart from other people. Some people just, they didn't have that much character development to even tell who was talking at some points. Some of them were fairly interchangeable. It really fell flat, and when people were dying, I just didn't care. Like, there was no emotional investment in the story for me. I was just curious to find out the mystery, but I didn't care that these people were dying, which you would think would be something, as an author, you would try to do. And it just didn't work for me. And even the mystery that was there, it didn't really do a whole lot for me. So yeah, other than like the premise itself, there wasn't really a whole lot redeemable for me in this book. So, the next book on my list is Anthem by Ayn Rand. This also had a really interesting idea and an interesting premise. So it's more or less a dystopian in which there is no individuality. It's gone to the point where the words I and me don't exist. They always talk about themselves in the plural, you know, we do this, we do that, even though it's just you. And it's a really interesting concept that's kind of being played out. It kind of has a similar problem to And Then There Were None, in the sense that we have this good idea, but it's not fully developed. We're just not given enough time with these characters and this world in this case. And so, like, I think both of those books would have benefited from being longer. They really aren't that long of books, both of them. They kind of almost both feel like short stories in a sense, because nothing is really fully developed. But there's a lot of interesting things kind of being thrown at you. It's just not fully developed. So to me, it was kind of a problem. It's not bad. It's okay. It's interesting. But again, we don't get a lot of it. And then the end really left a bad taste in my mouth. So the author clearly has a very specific ideology and point of view that she's trying to cram down your throat. and I did not appreciate that. Just in general, I don't like that method of storytelling. Like, you can present both sides. To me, it seemed very clear that, like, this is the right way of thinking, not like this is just the antithesis to that, and you can kind of decide what the best way to thinking is, but that's not really, at least to me, what I got out of the story. I think even if you're trying to give me what I agree with, it's just weird storytelling. Like, okay, I guess you're preaching to the choir. If that was the case, it's just not good storytelling. So that was not so good for me. Moving right along, the last two are fairly similar, so I'm just gonna throw them in here together, and they have similar titles and similar topics. The first of which is Stolen, and then we have Girl Stolen. Girl Stolen is definitely written for a younger audience than Stolen. Girl Stolen involves this young girl who is blind, who has been kidnapped. And I think for the age range which it's going for, which is probably middle grade, I think it's a pretty good book. It's a good introduction to some issues that blind people have to go through, just on a daily basis, and just kind of the struggles that they have to deal with. And I think it's kind of a good education and a good starting point to kind of understand and think about those kinds of issues that you just normally don't think about as a sighted person. And so that part I really did enjoy, but the actual narrative about being kidnapped was pretty bland to me, pretty obvious, pretty paint by numbers. But again, it is a middle school book, so I feel bad kind of degrading it in that way. It's very simple. I think that it has some merit though. It's an interesting book if you're younger, but I think as an adult reader it doesn't really have a whole lot to offer, but it was still interesting at least. And I did appreciate the commentary about being a blind person. So that was really interesting. I want to read more books about that, actually. It kind of inspired me in that sense. So it's not a whole bad. And then the other book, Stolen, is definitely written for a slightly older audience, but still not quite, I would say, adult level. And so it's a young girl. She's a teenager. She gets kidnapped, and she's taken to this, like, a remote place in, I think, Australia, with this man who kidnapped her. So this man, he doesn't have any intentions to hurt her in any way. He feels like he has rescued her, and that they have this, like, bond maybe, and because he's been watching her for a long time, which is super creepy, and he just kind of wants to just have a companion. He doesn't like people in general, and so he wants to live out on his own, but he's lonely, so he brings her with him. I think the problem for me with this book was that I really didn't like our protagonist. She was kind of obnoxious to me. I think that he makes it pretty clear repeatedly that he has no intention of harming her, and he does not harm her physically in any way, but yet she still, like, goes out of her way to just be obnoxious towards him. I guess it's a really weird thing. I guess I sided more with the kidnapper, which is weird because obviously I don't think it's a good thing to kidnap people, and I don't think that what he did is right. But at least he was treating her nicely. It was just a weird story, and I didn't really get a whole lot out of it, to be honest. So it was just a weird story to me. And again, I think it's probably one of those things where I guess it's not a book for me, but not that other people wouldn't like it, and not necessarily that it's a bad book, but I just wasn't fully on board, I guess, with it. It had some interesting points in it, but I just didn't fully enjoy it, so I guess it was disappointing on that level. So there you have it. Those are the books that I was most disappointed with in 2017. So please let me know if you either like or hate any of these books. Please let me know. I'd be really interested to hear what you think. Obviously, these are all my opinions, and I would love to hear yours. So with that, I want to, as always, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and until next time.